Did Jesus really exist? If so, where is the evidence? We know that after his death, the disciples spread the message of Jesus' resurrection, which gave rise to the Christian faith. However, is there any proof outside the Bible that he lived? What do non-religious historians say about him? And what can archaeology tell us about the life of Jesus? In this video, we will examine the existing historical records about Jesus' existence and discuss whether they are sufficient to prove that he did indeed live. So, without further ado, let's delve into the historical records that mention Jesus. Roman historian Tacitus wrote of Christus, who was executed under Pontius Pilate. This reference is found in his Annals, which were written around 116 AD, almost 100 years after Jesus' death. In this passage, Tacitus discusses the fire that destroyed a significant portion of Rome in 64 AD. He attributes the disaster to the Christians, followers of Jesus, who were apparently blamed at the time for the tragedy. Tacitus writes, "Therefore, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, the Christians. Their originator, Christus, was crucified in the reign of Tiberius by one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate." This quote is highly significant because it is one of the earliest pieces of non-biblical evidence we have that mentions Jesus. It comes from a reputable Roman historian. However, it's important to note that Tacitus isn't exactly providing positive information about Jesus. Instead, he offers a brief account of how Christianity began under the Roman Empire and ties it to an individual named Christus, who was crucified during the reign of Tiberius. Another valuable resource is the work of the Jewish historian Josephus, who provides additional details about Jesus. There are two passages in his works that refer to Jesus, although one has been the subject of much debate. The first reference appears in his Antiquities of the Jews, where Josephus describes James, the brother of Jesus, as a righteous man. This passage reads about this time it came to pass that a certain man at Jamnia, called Enanus, the son of Seth, who was of the royal race and related to our family, having gathered together a large number of the young men of the cities, excited them to madness, and persuaded them to make a riot, saying he himself would go up to the temple and offer up an offering, according to the law, but that they should assist him with armed force. Now when the multitude had done as he had ordered, and he went up into the temple, the high priest came up to him and beckoned to him with his finger, desiring him to leave that place. But he paid no regard to him, nor went out, but went boldly up to the altar and offered up the sacrifice. Accordingly, the priests rose up against him and slew him, and those that fled, some were taken and killed, and many escaped to the wilderness. It was at this time that James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, being killed at Jamnia by the Jews. While the authenticity of this passage has been questioned, due to possible alterations by early Christians, most scholars agree that the original text did contain a reference to Jesus, albeit with a different name. Some scholars believe that the original name was Joshua ben Joseph, which could have been misinterpreted or deliberately altered to Jesus, the Christ. However, the passage does not offer any additional details about Jesus himself, only mentioning his brother, James. The third piece of evidence comes from Pliny the Younger, a Roman senator and lawyer. He wrote a letter to the Emperor Trajan discussing how to handle the growing number of Christians in Roman Asia Minor. Pliny was unsure how to deal with them and sought guidance from Trajan, who advised him to continue treating them harshly. Pliny's letter contains a noteworthy detail about early Christians' beliefs. He states that they met on a fixed day, usually Sunday, and sang hymns to Christ as if he were a god. This reference is particularly interesting because it shows that even skeptics like Pliny recognized the divinity of Jesus. While he clearly didn't believe in Christianity, Pliny's letter provides insight into how early Christians worshipped and what they believed about Jesus. Beyond these writings, there are other historical sources that indirectly support the existence of Jesus. For example, the Babylonian Talmud, a collection of Jewish oral traditions, contains a story about a sage named Elisha ben Abuya, who was known for his wisdom and healing abilities. Some scholars believe that this Elisha may have been based on Jesus, although there is no direct evidence to confirm this theory. Similarly, the Quran, the holy book of Islam, mentions a man named Isa, whom Muslims believe to be Jesus. However, Islamic traditions differ from Christian beliefs regarding Jesus' nature and crucifixion. Now that we've explored various historical records mentioning Jesus, let's delve into the period between his childhood and the start of his ministry, often referred to as the missing years of Jesus. As we all know, the Bible provides accounts of Jesus' birth, but it doesn't offer much detail about his life until he began preaching and performing miracles. This lack of information raises questions about what he might have been doing during these missing years. There are several theories about what Jesus was doing during this time. Some scholars suggest that he may have traveled to India, Egypt, or other locations in the Middle East, where he would have been exposed to various religious and philosophical ideas. Others propose that he worked as a carpenter, following in his father Joseph's footsteps. However, none of these theories are definitively supported by historical evidence. It's worth noting that the Gospels themselves don't provide much clarity on the matter. Matthew's Gospel simply states that Jesus grew up in Nazareth, while Mark's Gospel mentions that Jesus spent time in the wilderness. Luke's Gospel offers a bit more detail, stating that Jesus was about 30 years old when he began his public ministry, and that he was engaged to a woman named Mary. However, it doesn't elaborate on what he was doing prior to this point. One intriguing possibility is that Jesus may have studied under a Jewish sage named Shammai, who was known for his wisdom and legal expertise. This idea is based on a saying attributed to Jesus in the Talmud, which suggests that he once debated with Shammai and other sages. However, this account, like others, isn't definitive proof of Jesus' existence. What can archaeology tell us about Jesus' life? Several archaeological findings shed light on the political and cultural backdrop of Jesus' life, though none directly prove his existence. For example, excavations in Nazareth have uncovered the ruins of a humble village that closely resembles the description in the Bible. This lends credence to the biblical account of Jesus' childhood home. Additionally, archaeologists have discovered ossuaries, which are stone boxes used to hold human remains that date back to the time of Jesus. These ossuaries often bear inscriptions that help researchers understand burial customs and social norms of the era. Furthermore, artifacts like coins and pottery provide insights into the everyday life and commerce during Jesus' lifetime. Finally, the Gessalian ossuary, which dates back to around 78, contains an inscription that reads, "Jesus, son of Joseph," providing a tangible link to the biblical Jesus. However, this artifact is controversial, as some scholars argue that it was created later and is not authentic. Overall, the archaeological record paints a vivid picture of the political and cultural context in which Jesus lived. While it doesn't offer direct evidence of his existence, it confirms many details of the setting described in the Gospels. To conclude, let's summarize the historical evidence for Jesus' existence. We have the testimony of Roman historians, like Tacitus, who mentioned the execution of Christus under Pontius Pilate. Additionally, the Jewish historian Josephus provided information about James, the brother of Jesus. Other writers, like Pliny the Younger, who described early Christians' worship of Jesus as divine. Together, these accounts offer a glimpse into the historical context of Jesus' life and ministry. They show that he wasn't merely a figure of faith, but an actual person who lived and taught during the time of the Roman Empire. While these historical records provide valuable context, they do have limitations, None of them offer a comprehensive account of Jesus' life or teachings. And some sources may have been influenced by early Christians, potentially altering the original accounts. Additionally, the missing years between Jesus' childhood and the start of his ministry remain largely unexplained, leaving room for speculation and various theories. Furthermore, it's essential to recognize the role of faith in understanding Jesus' existence and significance. Many people believe that the historical evidence, combined with their faith, is sufficient proof of Jesus' divinity. However, for those who approach this topic from a purely historical perspective, the available evidence doesn't definitively prove Jesus' existence. As we reflect on the historical evidence, it's important to keep in mind the complexities and nuances of each account. No single source provides all the answers, and each one must be examined in its historical context. By doing so, we gain a deeper appreciation for the historical backdrop of Jesus' life and the challenges involved in separating historical fact from religious belief. What are your thoughts on the historical evidence presented in this video? Do you find it convincing? Or do you have other perspectives to share? Please feel free to comment below and engage in respectful discussions about Jesus' existence and the historical context of his life. Your comments and insights are valuable, and we encourage a thoughtful exchange of ideas. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history and faith. Remember to support us. Amen. If you believe in Jesus, comment below. See you next time.